My in-laws demanded we name our baby the name they wanted, otherwise we would regret it, so we refused and broke their cultural tradition, and now they are blackmailing me and bombarding me with threats. Myself, 25, female, and my fiancé, 27, male, have a 2-month-old son. We are overjoyed at being parents, but most of my in-laws are refusing to even see our baby because of a decision we made concerning his name. My in-laws have a tradition of giving the firstborn son of every generation the same name. Let us say it is Peter. This has been going on for about 7 generations already, and they are very serious about it. My fiancé's eldest cousin was the latest person to get named Peter. Every one of his cousins has only had daughters so far, so our baby is the first son of his generation, and consequently should get the name. I have no problem with the name Peter, and would have been okay with naming my son that. Unfortunately, that was also the name of my uncle, who passed away before I was born. I will not get into details, but it was tragic and traumatizing for my family. My father never got over losing his younger brother. My grandmother asked the family not to name any of our future children Peter during her lifetime. My mother-in-law and father-in-law knew about this promise, and at first seemed to not only be okay with us avoiding the name Peter but also supportive of the one we chose. However, my grandmother sadly passed away when I was 7 months pregnant. We traveled for her funeral. On our last days there, my in-laws called to offer me their condolences. Then my mother-in-law asked me if I was willing to think about the name Peter now. Suddenly, they were insistent that the name we chose was awful and we had to honor their tradition. According to them, they had only agreed to make an exception for us for my grandmother's sake, and had no obligation to keep it now that she had passed. My family agrees that while it is true we do not have to avoid the name anymore, it still does not feel right to use it. My fiancé agrees with me as well, but his parents spent the last weeks of my pregnancy trying to convince us to change our minds about the name. When our baby was born and we named him what we wanted, my in-laws were furious that we had broken a 7-generation-old family tradition. Some of them had not previously wanted to name their sons Peter but did it anyway for the family's sake. They said our decision was selfish and that my family should have moved on by now. This has truly nothing to do with whether my family has moved on or not, it just felt like a betrayal to my grandmother and uncle's memories to even consider using the name. My father-in-law offered us $1,000 to change our son's name to Peter after he was born. That was 2 months ago, and neither of my fiancé's parents have met the baby or seen us since I was pregnant. Most of my in-laws are on their side, and this is causing a huge rift between my fiancé and his family. He assures me he is fine, but I am starting to feel really guilty about this. Am I the jerk? The tradition started, as far as I know, when the original Peter passed away and his son, also named Peter, named his firstborn after his father. Peter III ended up having the first son of the following generation and did the same thing. That one passed away before having children, so his sister gave the name to her son, and so on. The name Peter is very common in my country, so none of them ever got bullied over it, and the fact that it was also my uncle's name is not as unlikely as one might think. Also, middle names are not used in my country. Most people get the maternal surname before the paternal one instead. It was not $1,000. Different country, different currency. It is still a lot of money but would probably translate to about $200. About a week after my post, my fiancé's parents contacted us. They apologized for their behavior and begged to meet my son. They said they were ready to leave the naming debacle behind and truly wanted to be involved in their grandson's life. We were skeptical but invited them over to meet the baby. The visit went well. They began coming over almost every day during the next 3 weeks. I noticed neither of them ever called my son by his name, but I did not point it out. For the first time in months, things seemed good between my fiancé and his parents. One day, my fiancé was helping my father-in-law with something at our place, so my mother-in-law and I went to the park with my baby. Some time later, I had to go to the bathroom, so I left him in the stroller with her. When I got back, she was sitting on a park bench, chatting with a woman who was cooing over my son. I went over there and introduced myself as my son's name's mom, and she said, I thought his name was Peter. I did not say a word, and neither did my mother-in-law. She followed me to the car and we went back to my apartment. On the way there, I texted my fiancé about what had happened. The moment we got there, he kicked both his parents out of our place. He had read my texts and confronted his father. Thankfully, my father-in-law is a terrible liar and confessed immediately. Apparently, both my in-laws only call my son Peter. That includes whenever they are talking about him, every time they introduce him to someone else, and even maybe talking to him on the few occasions they were left alone with him. Neither of them is embarrassed by this, and they both think they are in the right. We are heartbroken. Especially my fiancé. Not only because his parents cannot let go of their pride, but also because the name we chose for our son means a lot to us both. I blame myself for encouraging my fiancé to allow them near our son. I was raised in a different city than all my grandparents, and always wished they could have been more involved in my life. Losing my grandmother did not help. Pretty much every doubt I had only existed because I thought it would be important for my son to grow up with all of his grandparents around. But now, all my guilt is gone. If they cannot respect my son enough to call him by his name, they do not deserve to be in his life. I hope they enjoyed the 3 weeks they had with their grandson. Because that is all they are getting until they get their heads out of their behinds. I thought I would clarify some things. First of all, I am not comfortable sharing my son's name here, but I promise it is not a unique name or anything like that. It is perfectly normal and popular-ish in our country. Secondly, I mentioned this in the comments, but while my family did not try to dictate me on my son's name, they would never be comfortable with it. My uncle Peter passed almost 3 decades ago, but it forever changed everyone who knew him. My grandmother's wish might seem a bit irrational, but it was motivated entirely by grief, and it did not seem right to disrespect that just because she is not around anymore. And to whoever messaged me that my fiancé is only on my side to keep the peace, he did not want to use the name either. Months before I got pregnant, he told me he hoped one of his cousins would have a son before we did, because he always hated the tradition and sympathized with my family. He is just as angry at his parents as I am, if not more. Also, most of his cousins and some other relatives have come around and apologized. My son is now 5 months old, almost 6. We are still not in contact with my fiancé's parents, who have not seen us since May. We have both blocked them everywhere. His relatives who were on our side still are, and most of the ones who are not have not come around. If anything, they are even more upset now. Following my previous update, my fiancé's side of the family remained upset about the tradition being over for a few more months. They were way less intense about it, especially with the pregnant cousin I mentioned, but it was still evident. That cousin's child was born in January. Our son turned 1 the next month. I think the fact that these two things happened so close together helped many of my in-laws let go of the tradition. We got a few apologies we were not expecting. Some of them were sincere enough that we slowly started re-establishing contact. My fiancé's parents were not among those who apologized. We have not spoken to either of them since last July. From what I have heard from some of his other relatives, however, my mother-in-law seems regretful. She has told some of them that she wishes she could be part of her grandson's life and wonders if making his name a hill to perish on was a bad decision. My father-in-law, from what I gather, barely acknowledges my baby exists. My fiancé knows about how his mother feels, but he says he does not care. And even if we did get an apology, I do not think either of us can forgive his parents. As much as we are mostly okay now, it sometimes feels like their treatment of our family ruined the first few months of our baby's life. I know that is not actually true, but I do not want them around my child. Besides all that, things have been great. My son is 15 months old now, which I do not think I will ever really get used to. He recently started drawing and has been expanding his vocabulary. He said mom first, by the way. My fiancé and I are still getting married in September. We are thinking about moving abroad in a couple of years, for work reasons, but we are not sure yet. We also recently got a dog. Sadly, we did not name him Peter. This will be my final update. Whatever guilt I had about this situation a year ago is completely gone, and my life has been peaceful enough that it feels safe to say the chaos is over. I remember someone suggesting that my fiancé's family might stop using the name after we decided not to. Well, you were right. Last week, one of my fiancé's cousins announced she was pregnant with a boy. She included her baby's name in the announcement, and it is not Peter. What followed was a string of aggressive Instagram direct messages from both my mother-in-law and father-in-law. They both created accounts for the sole purpose of contacting me. I did not see them until 2 days later. They sent me almost an hour worth of voice messages about how I had ruined their family. They wished their son had never met me, that he would see me for who I truly am, and that I had never gotten pregnant. Many of the messages ended with "I hope you are happy now," as if they thought they were getting the last word, only to think of something else they wanted to say. There was name-calling, an accusation of me cheating, and the persistent refusal to refer to my son as their grandchild. My fiancé and I listened to the messages together. He had not gotten any. As much as I tried to distance myself, I was in tears by the time it was all done. I still do not regret anything, especially after the stunt they pulled back in May, but I am not completely free of the guilt yet, not to mention their complete disregard for their grandson. I was already having an overwhelming week, and this just seemed like the final straw. I must have spent close to an hour sobbing in my fiancé's arms. Once I was calmer, he unblocked his parents just to scream at them for a while. I only heard his side of the conversation, but it was more than enough. He finished the call by saying he did not want to hear from them again. We had a long talk afterward. My fiancé opened up about the emotional blackmail by his family before and after my pregnancy. My in-laws were close to threatening him with anything they could if we did not name our son Peter. I told him about my guilt, and how awful I feel for putting him through this. We reassured each other, cried a bit more, and had a mostly pleasant evening with our baby. We contacted his cousin. The family is giving her trouble for breaking the tradition again. They are being way less aggressive though, and I think many of my in-laws are finally learning to let go. We are not expecting any apologies anytime soon, but we will be glad if they come. Our wedding will be in September 2024, and whoever does not give us a sincere apology until then is uninvited. My fiancé's parents are banned either way. We came to that decision together. Also, I would like to address some comments on my previous update about how I was letting my family's trauma win. or how the name would not be hurtful now that my grandmother has passed. I cannot stress enough the damage my uncle's passing caused. He was only 30 years old. He had a fiancée, a great career, and his whole life ahead of him. I do not know many details about what happened because I did not want to upset my family by asking. My grandmother was not the only person hurt by this, my entire paternal family was. And if I remember correctly, the person responsible is not even in prison anymore. It was more than 20 years ago, but the wound never truly closed. So yeah, I think it is safe to say the tradition is over. The next child will be here in January, right before my son's first birthday. It was never my intention for this to turn into such a catastrophe, but I am so incredibly proud of my little family.